Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Life podcast on a very special day. Today that we're recording is Memorial Day, and it's an important day for both Peter and I. Peter is a veteran, his father was a veteran, my father was a veteran, and we recognize today and honor all who have served for their sacrifice and for what they've given to help preserve our freedom and our country. We also want to acknowledge the many caregivers of veterans who are taking on the challenges that these veterans have with them at home, physical, emotional, in every way. They are sacrificial in their own way. They can inspire us. How do they do what they do day after day? We're going to look at some of that today. So welcome again to the Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. I'm Jenny Stevenson, your host, and joining me is Dr. Peter Bernstein. Today we continue in our series on how to survive through adversity. Dr. Bernstein, or Peter as he likes to be called, is a coach and mentor with almost 50 years of experience helping people survive and grow through trauma, struggles, and hard times, the stuff of real life. The goal of our series is to help you discover what we've experienced, that adversity is more than a trial to endure. It can be an exciting opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a nice start. And I honestly feel that this is usually the day that I'm most touched and inspired, probably most of the year. This year, of course, I couldn't go to the Veterans Day commemoration here in Sonoma County because of the isolation that we have to experience. I miss it because that really touches me. I see such a diverse population of folks that have been touched by military things and wars and battles. And to me it means a lot, and I'm very touched by it. I know that I personally have lost some friends in Vietnam War, and I didn't go overseas. They did. I was in the services in a training, infantry training unit, and most of my friends did go overseas. And I lost some of my very good friends who actually, when I look back on it, were a lot better people than I was at that time. But it left a great imprint on me as I matured and grew older. I knew their widows very well since childhood. So I followed it, and it impacted me. I saw their children who never knew their fathers, and it touched me deeply, and I'm still touched. Maybe not quite like I was then, because I had a great deal of guilt, survivor's guilt they call it, and I had plenty of it. But anyway, today is different. Today we have Veterans Day.
Memorial Day, actually, I'll just throw
I
it
call
in.
it, yeah, but I call it.
You call it Veterans Day?
I call it Veterans Day.
Okay.
Yeah, to me it's the day of commemorating veterans and those that have given their lives. So to me it is a Memorial Day for them, and it's also a Veterans Day, and I see both in my mind.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. And but anyway, we've done last episode that we did. Sometimes we do a lot of preparation because there's a lot of good material out there that we study, that we take in, that inspires us or educates us. And I think last week we had taken in so much information that I couldn't figure out which one to go for first. So I felt fragmented. There was a lot of good stuff there that I wish I could have said it all. This week, I'll be darned. I said I wasn't going to do that, and I sat down and read a number of very good articles. And I think I'm overwhelmed again by the good material. There is a lot of crossover. And what really interests me is a lot of these folks are saying the same things that we've been saying for a long time. And only they say it a little differently, and I like that. But the theme seems to be the same throughout, that through difficulties, suffering, challenges, crises, there's a resilience and a strengthening that can come out of that. And that's what we talk about all the time, how that can happen, what people can pay attention to. We live that, we work it, We helped many people. I've helped many thousands of people over almost 50 years. But I think that one of the things that strikes me is when I read how other people say these things and add to it and say some very meaningful things. And I just keep picking up different articles, and I enjoy them, some more than others. A lot of them are saying the things that I do know, that I see and that I believe, and so do they. So I think one of the things that really touches me today, there's a theme throughout, and that is, what is it that, even through these very difficult times, which is a world crisis, pandemic crisis with this virus, what is it that people can get out of it? What is it that it does? What is it that the challenges, we know the negative challenges, the isolation, not working, financial crises and crunches, people who've actually gotten sick, family members that have lost loved ones, over near 100,000 deaths just in the United States in 6 months. That's enormous. There's no getting around it. It's enormous. And I read these stories that are so touching about the frontline workers and what they see and what they go through, and how some of the stories I read are so deeply touching because they know the family members can't be there as their loved ones are dying in the hospital. So here these folks who are dying, they're with strangers, they're with nurses and doctors. And some of these nurses, I know it's not all, but some of these nurses are so human and so heartfelt that they have more than just the medical knowledge. They have something so special. They have an empathy and a caring that's so human. And I love those people. I think they are heroic in the best sense of the word. And I've read some beautiful vignettes of stories of some of these nurses and how deeply touched they are to see what's going on and to be there for some of these folks that are dying from the virus. But yet, these nurses go on. The ones that really touch my heart are the ones that know that they've got to let down at some point. They've got to take care of the emotional impact and the energy that they're absorbing from their caring ways and their empathic ways. Those are the special nurses and doctors for sure. And I love them, and I appreciate them for doing that. There's others that aren't that open, and they're a different breed. They're essential, and they're very bright and attentive, but yet when it comes to that very special quality, not everybody has that. I love the stories of hearing these folks that do, though, and that they do have to sneak away and take time to let down from the impact of some of these tragic stories that they're seeing. And I've read some wonderful op-ed pieces about them, and very touching. But we also know that we've been talking about something that we call the extraordinary reality for quite a while now. The extraordinary reality is what we live in and what other folks live in who are on the front lines dealing with sickness, dying, and death. And you can imagine, that's the one thing, the one condition of life that most people are, certainly in our country, are going to go the other way. And that our whole society is geared up for distraction from that and keeping busy so they don't have to face that and deal with it. Unfortunately, that is a vulnerability and a fragility to our culture that we are now coming to face head on with this crisis, because everyone is being confronted with the disease. You can't get away from it, and that people are going to die from it. But I think more importantly, what really sticks out is that we're forced to face the reality of that we're all going to die someday. Death is real, and it's an interesting phenomenon. When it's held out here, it gets to be so terrifying and scary you don't even want to get near it. And yet, as you deal with it more and more, it becomes a closer reality to you. And it brings about changes that aren't all bad. In fact, they free you up in so many ways. I know that's happening for me, and has happened, and many people around me who do this incredible work. Same thing. And there's an aliveness, an appreciation, a gratitude of life and a freedom that they didn't have before. And I really believe that it's very important to to face the possibility that everybody's going to die, nobody's going to get out of this life alive, and there's no more running away. Now, I know people try, but that only causes negativity and trouble and fearfulness. I think as we face it, what we really begin to face is ourselves. And we can really come to a place that I think is so wonderful and so precious in this extraordinary reality, and that is becoming a more authentic you. Becoming a person who lives by the truth in life, doesn't waste his time too much on the things that aren't terribly important anymore. And the world is filled with all kinds of distractions of things that aren't really that important. But this is a quality of life that we're forced to face, and many people are now, where we have to really look at what's important in life and deal with it. We can't escape it. And I think out of that, a lot of good comes. But it's also a very agonizing process to go through that, to learn about death and dying. Ours, when it's going to come, we can certainly begin to realize we're all going to die. But also when we're dealing with loved ones and we hear about so many people who are dying from this virus, well, it's Memorial Day. And what I am always touched by are the families and the loved ones of soldiers that come home terribly wounded and maimed from the horrors of war. And they have to live in such a debilitated state so much of the time. And a lot of their injuries are a lifelong kind of injury, and they're very traumatic. What always strikes me, at least for me, is the courage that these people show, and they do go through some very difficult emotional states of discouragement and despair about knowing they're never going to be able to walk again, they're not going to be able to stand again and sit again, and so many different terrible injuries. And yet out of that, you can see a certain kind of hope and positive attitude and renewal of strength in ways they never imagined would happen. I'm always extremely touched by that. But the other part that touches me are their loving caregivers. Now, I also know, because I have experience with this and helping folks, that not all the loved ones stick around. It's too overwhelming. They can't handle it. They can't accept their loved one in that state, and they disappear, and they're not there. For those folks, I'm not even going to talk about that too much. What really moves me are the folks that stick around, the young wives, the children, the moms and dads who are right at the dramatically injured vet's side through all the ups and downs that these folks go through, and it's horrendous many times. But to watch the gratitude and selfless love it's got to be, it's something that people have got to look at and go, now how do they get there with these horrible injuries, this terrible loss? Their life for the rest of their life is going to be compromised. They're going to be taking care of a very wounded veteran who they loved once when they were really healthy and well and vibrant. And yet the love that begins to show in the caregiving is so much more selfless and deeper and more matured. And I saw something in the Memorial Day concert in Washington, and I know I've seen it before because they have replays. And some of these beautiful young women, their husbands leave, and they're handsome and they're healthy and they're well, and they come back and they're in such bad shape. And these women show such a courage and such a selfless love that through it all, they have a certain kind of smile and depth of appreciating life and their loved one that you wouldn't have found before it happened. We have been involved with families like that, and I have to tell you, it's moving every time. It's not something you wind up feeling sorry for them for. What you do is you feel very, very inspired by them, as well as they need our help and our support. But at the same time, there's no give up in particularly the caregivers. The folks that are, a lot of the veterans that are wounded, they do hit points where they just don't want to go on. It's terrible what they all talk about. They don't want to impact and burden others anymore. And some points they don't want to go on, and yet it's these caregivers and loved ones that are right at their side, encouraging with love and care, and they're not going anyplace. They're going to be there through it, thick and thin. And they're very, very inspiring people. And these aren't old, broken down old people facing death at the end of life. These are young, vibrant people.
Not at all. Not at all.
No.
You're right. You're right.
Very vibrant.
We'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
You've been listening to the Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. And today is Memorial Day. And in our first segment, Peter really took time to talk about kind of the theme. We have a phrase for it sometimes, kind of the red thread. What is it that we see going through this time with the pandemic? And it does relate to Memorial Day veterans and their caregivers. And that is that these are difficult times. The pandemic, combat, service, difficult times. What can come from it for good? It's what we've been calling an extraordinary reality, and the value in facing it, and that it's real. These hard things, these challenges are real. It can bring about changes in us, a sense of aliveness, Peter says, appreciation, gratitude, and a sense of freedom and knowing what matters that you can't have when you run away from difficult challenges like this.
No.
This can help you become a more authentic person, more truthful. And you said it's an agonizing process. And yet it is how we grow. When we finished the first section, you were starting to talk about caregivers and the caregiving experience for veterans who return with wounds, either physical, emotional, or both. And we've worked with some couples like that, some people like that, who could walk away and don't.
Well, we've had both kinds.
We've had both kinds. It's the ones that don't that are so inspiring.
Well, you talk about what is happening, but in my mind, when I watch some of these stories and of what these folks go through, I ask myself, how do they get there? How do they reach that point of not just hanging in there, but actually looking like in some ways they're thriving and they're improving and maturing? And I'm talking primarily the caregivers and how infectious that is for the person they're taking care of. And I ask myself, as an observer, but as a person who also is interested in this and works in it and actually has some of the answers. You see, I have a good idea of how they do it. And it's a different state of fulfillment. And, we've read some papers, a fellow a psychologist that I remember in my master's days, getting my master's. His name was Daniel Goleman, and he was a psychologist and sociologist too at the time. And what I remember, and we just read a paper, an op-ed piece in I don't know, New York Times or whatever, and he was referenced, and he's been around a long time, and talking about just this thing. Well, what is it that motivates people to be these caregivers, to be so selfless and giving, and how do they do it? Because what we learn from them can carry over into...
We all need to know that now.
Right now, more than ever, we're in a crisis, and what we're seeing is too many people have no clue.
No.
And it's unfortunate, but we knew that was going to happen. And it's actually a fragility in our society that people have avoided it for so long, now that it's in their face. And
They're
it is
unprepared to make this time more positive, more productive, and not a disaster.
And they don't know how to get there.
No.
And this time, they don't have a whole lot of choice. It's in everybody's face.
Right.
So, I look at that, and I remember Daniel Goleman talked about extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators.
Yeah, can you kind of
Yes.
give us the basics of
I'm
that?
going to, because we call it tangibles and intangibles. That's the papers we've written. We've written a lot about it. We've talked a lot about it. Others talk about internal motivations and external. But this is what Daniel Goleman said, but it's the same principle.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, a lot of the time, live by external motivation. What does that mean? We're looking for doing things because we're going to get something out of it.
Like a reward.
Security, award, people that work in corporations, it's a 401c, 401's the monies they get, the security, the guarantees they get. For others, it's other things. The homes we own, the prestige we have, the power, the money, all of that is based all on external variables. In other words, we do these things to receive something from an external source.
Or possibly to avoid something that we don't want, like something negative happening.
Being afraid that something negative will happen. It's
right.
Fear-based, there's no
Fear-based.
question about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people who have thought that they're really investing themselves in their life and their energy into things that are going to give them this security and protection. During these crises, we saw it in the last one too, only this one is much more widespread, we saw people losing the things that were going to give them security, and they thought they were doing just fine, and they'd done all the right things, and they had the financial security, the jobs, the money, the homes, everything they wanted, and it was taken away in a very short time.
That recession.
Through no fault of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one is even much broader because it involves health as well.
Health, and everyone is involved.
All right. And everyone is involved also with the financial. People who want to work, and there's millions of them, can't. I mean, the unemployment thing, I think we're at 30 million unemployment.
Oh boy.
It's
Yeah.
enormous. I've never heard anything.
It's like kind of mind-boggling.
I've never heard anything like this before. But what I look at, what we're really getting to is the external motivators are what most of us have wanted and gotten.
That's what we pursue.
Until it's stripped away. And it's not by choice many times. But would that be enough to carry us through difficult times? And the answer is absolutely not. In fact, those are the weaknesses, those are the fragilities and the vulnerabilities that are not good in these times. And a lot of times if people relied so much on that, they go into being not just fight or flight, but they freeze, they're petrified, they get very depressed and discouraged and despairing, and they don't know what to do. They can't move forward. They're used to other people telling them what to do and acknowledging them, particularly corporate structure, and all of a sudden they don't have that. And they have to stay at home yet. So they're petrified, and they sink into these very dark depressions that have probably been there all along anyway. But what happens is they're so used to that control over their life, the routines they've had, and the external motivators that they've worked so hard for, and much of that is being stripped away. So you look at that and you go, well, would that be enough for these folks that we're watching, let's say right now, the loved ones who are taking care of their beloved who has been terribly maimed and wounded in war? Would that be enough? And the answer is those are the folks that are probably going to leave. If that's what their emphasis, their partner isn't going to be able to give them what they need anymore, they can't take it.
Right.
And they can't take the work it's going to take and the selfless sacrifices, so that they vanish. But what really is interesting is how many don't, and how many really become so deeply involved. And you got to ask yourself, and yet you see how fulfilled they seem to be, and enriched, and feeling good. And it inspires me, it touches me, and I love seeing that. But then I ask myself, I bet you people are asking, how do these people get to that place?
Yes.
What do they get out of this?
This is not external, so what is this?
This is internal, intrinsic motivators, as Goldman talks about. What does that mean? It's a different motivator. It's a kind of motivator that is really the source of our true strength and fulfillment. It has nothing to do with people pleasing. It has nothing to do with worrying about what other people think of us. Those are all external motivators. It has to do with doing things that actually are self-fulfilling. And it may not be money at all. It may be other things, but it's so fulfilling. What is that? What does it look like? It usually has to do with an altruism, a giving back to others, caring for others. Not necessarily worrying about what other people think at all, to be honest with you. And we're not there just to please others, although we want to help, so there is that element. But these people can't always get us accolades and good pats on the head.
No.
So we're giving selflessly, and we're putting out a lot of energy. And you got to ask yourself, well, I ask myself, and I know some of the answer. There's something more to all of this. How do you get to that selfless place? And it's an interesting thing because I also pay attention to the neurophysiology of this faculty and different parts of how the brain works. And the part that really benefits the most and is the most stimulated is the left side of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that side has to do with giving back, altruism, caring for others. It's the thing that feeds on itself in the sense of it helps us be fulfilled and motivated to keep going. And instead of feeling bad, we feel really good. If we run up against an obstacle in our efforts, it's amazing. Of course we have our frustrations and our anger, but the difference is we do something with it to find an alternative way to get what we need to do to help another person. I love that, and I live by that myself. Doesn't mean we don't get frustrated, but the way we use our anger and frustration is to help others and for the sake of others.
It strengthens us in motivating us to keep going with this purpose that we have to help.
And it's very, it's very fulfilling. It feels really good to do.
Yeah.
And yet you got to ask yourself, well, what do you get out of it? And the answer is, well, externally we may not get anything, but internally we're getting this sense of healing and fulfillment that keeps us resuscitated, restored, and resilient.
Yes.
That's the left side of the brain. The right side of the prefrontal cortex is exactly the opposite, where people collapse. They go to hopelessness and despair and discouragement, and they don't get out of their own way. They have nothing. They can't be altruistic. They can't give. They don't want to. They just go into this collapse, and there's no altruism in that place at all. It's exactly the opposite.
And that builds as well. The more that you get into that pattern, you stay more on that side too.
Just the opposite. It drains you and breaks you.
Right.
And there's where the depressions and the despair and discouragement really come from. No good option is going to come out outside. But when you look at, you don't have to look at, well, I want my brain to be stimulated, don't worry about that. It's when you start stepping outside of yourself and caring for others. That's that left side is the side that gets triggered and stimulated.
Like it lights up, right? Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're not doing just for others, it's doing for us too. We're being fulfilled and restored and finding resilience in the midst of it. And I mean, when I say fulfilled, a way of loving and caring that you never would have found any other way. It usually does come with hurdles of suffering and struggle and challenges and pain. And it's actually sometimes the more difficult the challenge is, and the more we have to be creative and finding a way. And once we decide we're not going to run, which is a normal part of us, but that doesn't mean everybody does. And you sit and you stand and you turn around and you begin to engage with the problem and engage with the person who's in need. It's astounding the changes that it can bring about in people.
You've been listening to the Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. In our last segment, and again, today is Memorial Day, and we are talking, certainly just in this last segment, about the role of a caregiver for, say, a wounded veteran or any caregiver. What keeps them going and fulfilled and rewarded by what they do, or what can make them just run? And Peter was going through the contrasting two motivations. One is external, where people are motivated to do what they do because they'll get something back. Could be financial, it could be security, it could be status, power, or people pleasing, that people will like them. Mm-hmm. And contrasting that with some internal, intrinsic motivation of what what do we bring out of ourselves to give? What is meaningful and fulfilling to us personally from our heart? And we were also talking about our brain and the sides of our brain that are associated with each of these types of motivation and behavior, and how to think about pursuing things that are more rewarding and fulfilling and less depleting and despairing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Our expertise or our challenge in our life that we've embraced is for the folks that are internally motivated. That doesn't mean they don't have challenges. It's what you need to do to move through these challenges. And there's plenty of support out there. We have plenty of support. And I think one of them is finding people who are like-minded, who have more experience or know us and can support us with what we're going through. That really helps. Self-care is a completely different thing, because if it's externally motivated, we're talking about selfishness and self-centeredness.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about internally and intrinsic motivators, and our old papers, we talked about tangible material things
Right.
versus the intangibles. Well, I think what's really different is it's not selfish at all.
Yeah.
It's if you want to really do a good job and stay fulfilled and stay energized and restored and renewed, so you can be there over and over again.
Keep doing the work you're doing.
And it's difficult work.
Yeah.
And that has to do with self-care. Self-care is something different. Also, well, how do you deal with some of these hurdles that we do come up against as caregivers? Some of them are so overwhelming. And I look at that sometimes, and they are overwhelming. And at the same time, what do we have to do? What do we begin to learn about those things? Or what do we begin to learn about ourselves? In other words, how do we learn to be motivated and creative, and also how to take care of ourselves with these really overwhelming things that happen that everybody's faced with? That's a really good subject right in and of itself, because we do need to deal with ourselves and look at ourselves. If we're in this world that we're talking about, we're not talking about an easy life.
And everyone really right now is in this world too with the pandemic.
Well, they're challenged to be.
They're
Not
challenged.
everybody is in it, no.
No.
I think everybody is faced with choices now. And this kind of realization and revelation, I don't think this comes because somebody tells you about it. It's something very, very personal. But what we're seeing is on a massive level, there's such a huge challenge and confrontation to choosing.
Yes.
And, they talk about, well, we'll eventually come out of this crisis. Of course we will. Are we going to come out of it for the better or not? Well, I think for one of the things, the most meaningful, purposeful thing that we could find in this is who we really are, authentically really are, and to focus on what really matters, and to discover our purpose in life and why we're put on this earth. It may be very different from what we've been doing before the pandemic. We may be having time now to reevaluate, painfully so. But reevaluate is what we're doing and the way we're doing it. Do we want to keep doing it that way? Is it really been the best thing? These are very difficult questions, and yet it's happening.
Very practical questions.
Well, it could be, yeah. But you know what? No, I don't think everybody's going to choose
No.
I don't. I think that many people, I hope they do, but I have no idea what people are going to do. But I know the folks that are motivated and move into this internally motivated place are going to come out of this so much better and find a deeper meaning and sense of purpose to their lives that will take them on for many years, in spite of the difficult challenges that their life may have. Mm-hmm. So I do think that we're at a choice point for the masses. Do I know what they're going to do? I don't. I know what I hope for, and I do. I hope for that. I also have a lot of hope and concern and caring for the people that are on the front lines right now, who do live in this extraordinary reality, because they are being so challenged and overwhelmingly confronted with things that they're not going to always be able to do well at. They can't help it.
No.
There's so much of that now, and it's in such a massive, coming at them in such a massive way. And I look at that and I go, I care for these people, and I look to them, and I feel caringly for them, and I know these are tough times to just cope, to get through this. We have a lot of friends that are first responders. They're my favorite, but they're also live in their own little world, and that's the truth. They are what I call, they have a warrior mentality. And that mentality is they got to tough it out and move through it. And they're struggling with things that are confronting them that most of us wouldn't choose to do. And but they also feel they got to be tough, and they got to be strong and self-reliant.
Self-reliant.
And I understand that mentality.
And you can have some respect for that.
Yes.
But it can go too far.
It can go too far, and especially as a culture, it's gone too far.
Yeah.
Because they live in their own protective cocoon. Now, these people don't live protected. I don't mean that. They're out there doing things that most of us wouldn't want to go near. But as far as how they cope, there's a lot to be said. What really amazes me, I know the first responder world. I know when I come up, what the barriers are that I come up against. I'm not a first responder. And like I said, a lot of my friends are first responders, and I love them. I know them personally. Well, reading a lot of these papers lately and talking to people, I'm not the only one who knows how difficult they are to reach. It's a well-known fact that these people try to be tough, they got to be invulnerable, and they're afraid that if they let go, that they're going to just crash and they aren't going to be able to put themselves back together.
They'll fall apart and they won't be functional
and they
anymore.
won't be reliable. Yeah. So that meant that we've seen it I saw it in the Navy SEALs when we worked with them, and the people we knew are pretty remarkable. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is that mentality has taken many of them, we've seen it, we've worked with them, to a point where they really do eventually crash and burn out.
And we're reading about that. There's an article we talked about in our last podcast, number 77, definitely seeing that in the medical professionals and first responders now who are working so intensely with pandemic patients, and the concern by their supervisors, by the other people that are working with them. They see them starting to break down and wanting to reach them somehow, and feeling like they can't get through. They can't get through this culture of barrier of being self-reliant.
Well, you're talking about supervisors, right?
Well, or whoever is kind of, maybe it's not the supervisors, maybe it's the people who are there trying to help with the people cope and keep them going.
Okay, because there's two different things. I think one of the things that happens is during that time, people start feeling abandoned and alone in their struggles.
Yeah.
And instead of the higher-ups taking the time to take care of their people and to realize this is unbearable, and they've got to have some time to let down. They've got to be understood. They've got to be appreciated. They've got to be, somebody's got to be there for them, not just their peers, although that's very, very important, but they got to know that the people above them do care. And these folks are not just expendable. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's always happening. In fact, I think it's not. And that's a problem, because there's a trauma that comes out of that called the abandonment trauma, and I do believe it's real.
Or betrayal. They talked about that too.
Sorry, the betrayal.
The betrayal, yeah.
Yeah, to me, I associate that with abandonment trauma.
I'm there too.
And I think it's very real.
Yeah.
I do. There are supervisors that are excellent and really tune into their people and take care of them and want to. Mm-hmm. So I'm certainly not talking about them. They're the best. But I'm talking about the other folks that don't, and there are many. And at this time, that discrepancy is really showing itself.
It is, yeah.
I do believe the people on the front lines, the first responders, are our heroes now. They are in the front. They are the war, and it's an overwhelming kind of thing that they're witnessing. Talking about seeing life and death in the battle, they're
there all the time.
They're getting there. It's just crushing numbers that are coming on them, and it breaks their hearts.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I've seen with a lot of first responders is when we talk about pushing the pause button. they push the off button.
They're off.
So they're not going to get into it at all, and they're not going to get into it afterwards, and they're not going to take care of themselves.
No, they're going to hope that they bury it, they hope it stays there.
Or they're going to drink themselves. Alcohol is a big deal, and drugs.
Right.
That's a very poor way to cope. The truth is that the level of distress just keeps growing on itself.
Yeah.
Those aren't the folks that stay resilient. Those are the ones that fall apart, and they don't become reliable. On the contrary, the folks that do have this ability to push that pause button we always talk about, and they really can respond
in the moment.
Exactly
beautifully what's needed.
But they know they're being effective. They feel they're tuned into themselves and their body and how they're taking on the energy of these traumatic situations, and that they're going to have to take some time. We call it taking some time to let down emotionally and get rid of what they've accumulated. Those folks stay very resilient. Most of the time, those are not the ones that collapse and are reliable. Those are the ones that come back stronger and more dependable most of the time. So we're seeing these kinds of issues coming up more and more. And we look at it as it's one of our life's callings to support these folks and help them and teach them and coach them and consult with them and help them recover from this. We also look at it as the sooner we can get to them, the better off they are. Because we don't want to, long term, it's much harder to deal with the damage done. If we can get to it at the time when it's still fresh, we can get them through it quicker. And we can keep them on their feet and send them back.
Send them back and also prevent a possible down the road physical illness and relationship damage and the really significant
absolutely
consequences.
So we are committed to helping those folks.
You've been listening to The Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to The Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. Peter and I are here today on Memorial Day, and we're just coming to the last segment of our podcast today, and we've been talking about, just in the last segment, about how do caregivers, first responders stay resilient on the job amidst the incredible stress and challenge. The importance of self-care, the importance of pushing what we call the pause button, staying with the situation, doing what needs to be done, but knowing at the same time that they are taking on a very deep level of emotional distress that they will need to take care of later.
Yeah, and I do relate it back to Memorial Day caregivers. I do. This is a time to me that I usually am deeply touched. I hope a lot of people are, to see what these folks, these loved ones who become caregivers, to see what they do go through, to see what their children go through, and to see something come out of these folks that is astounding and it's inspiring, because they're so invested and they're so, when you look at it from an outside, you just ask yourself, how can they do this day after day?
Yeah.
We're talking about the ways it can be done and how to help these people, and also what we all can learn from them, especially during this time when we're all faced with this extraordinary reality. What is it really that we see how fearful people are. We see how distrustful they have become at times, especially in the beginnings of it. We see that they don't know what they're doing. They've been avoiding it for so long.
They don't know what to do.
They don't know what to do, and to them
they
it's just,
don't maybe even want to look at what it might be.
That's the way they've lived. But what we can learn from these folks that have been loved ones and caregivers to our veterans who have come back terribly maimed and broken, and to watch the inspiring life of these folks unfold.
Yeah, let's talk about that for those who are listening today. What can we learn from their example? What can we take away?
Well, I think we're looking at courage over weakness and running away. We're looking at veterans who are faced with horrendous losses of limbs and active parts of their life, who feel burdened about what they're putting on their families. We've worked with some who they wanted to just...
They said, leave me, don't stay with me.
Exactly.
I will ruin your life, is basically how
And
they
we've
felt.
seen that. And we've also seen these remarkable caregivers go No.
No way.
We're here. I love you, and I'm going to work this out with you, and we're going to stay together. That doesn't mean it's going to be an easy road. In fact, it's very difficult. But yet, if you watch these people that do that, and ones who learn all the different things they have to do to take care of themselves, to keep this resilience going, and the hope, and the restoration, well, can learn a lot. I was watching the commemorative last night, and one fellow had been shot in the neck, and he was paraplegic after that. And beautiful wife, he was a handsome guy. She stuck by him through and he talked about the incredible challenges that he faces every day of his life. And you know what he and his wife are doing? And we know a couple that did this. They're opening up a rehab facility for people that are suffering with the same kind of injuries he is.
Right.
Tell me that doesn't. We worked with a Navy SEAL couple, a young couple.
Yes.
They did the same thing.
Exactly the same.
Same thing. In fact, this beautiful couple, they would never be able to have children. They've adopted 2 newborns since then. They opened up the new rehab. The facility he was part of, I'll never forget this, wasn't making money, and the doctor abandoned it. They took it over and made it into a nonprofit for not just veterans, but all people suffering from similar kind of injuries.
Yes.
And they've been very inspiring, and they're very inspired. They're a great, beautiful couple. But I watched the same kind of mentality on watching these veterans, and I've seen many stories. I've had many friends of mine who have done the same kind of thing. They just find a courage to go on in a new way and to work with their handicaps and their disabilities, and so do their loved ones. And it's a different kind of life, no question about it. And yet these folks have a deeper love and appreciation and gratitude for every day of their life. And I love seeing that. I know I experienced it too. I have loved ones that I've taken care of. One, my wife right now, who's coming to the end of her life, and a very active, beautiful woman, and we're taking care of her. And frankly, it's amazing to me that I've been a pretty good person and caring and loving. I've always loved her and adored her. But what really amazes me is I'm becoming a better man the deeper she goes into this, because I've discovered a way to be grateful and to be selfless in my love for her. And she can't give me anything back anymore, and yet I almost don't care.
This is the internal that we were talking about
right.
earlier.
It doesn't mean it doesn't, there's not pain involved. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying that. In fact, there's plenty of pain involved. There's grief involved. But at the same time, it's part of my life. And this is the people I care about. And this isn't the only one I'm taking care of. But it's the one that means the most to me. And I'll tell you what, if she's breathing and her eyes are open in the morning, my day is made. Now that she can't talk, she talks almost not at all anymore. She can't see, she's bedridden. And yet, the littlest things mean a lot to me, as well as so does the other. When I watch the deterioration, that gets to me too.
Oh, yes,
and
you're human.
It's very much so. And one of the things that I realize is there's not much more I can do for her, and yet there's part of me that always wants to find some way, if I can, to turn this around. So what I look at is the same thing we're all confronted with as caregivers, and that is we don't always have control over what we're facing, particularly when you're dealing with death and dying and terrible disabilities, that we are faced with the idea, it's not an idea, we don't have control.
No.
And that's a very hard thing to come to grips with. Caregivers are forced to go through much deeper changes, and they become more authentic, more real and truthful and loving than they'd ever been before, because they have to be. And so that means they're going to feel the impact of these things that are going on with their loved ones and people they're taking care of. There's no one saying you're not feeling it, but it's how resilient you can become, and how to find and discover the ways to stay resilient. And that's what we're committed to, with others as well as ourselves.
As ourselves. It's
an ongoing process. This isn't, now I got it. But when I think about this Memorial Day, I think about this dovetails beautifully into what we do and what we speak about all the time. The internal motivators, the things that really make us help us find fulfillment, find our own well-being and health in the midst and in spite of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We're committed to that. We're committed to helping people understand their bodies more and read the stress and how it's affecting them and then what to do about it. My life's work is committed to helping them with that, because it can be a deadly thing if you don't know what to do. So good intentions aren't enough. It's a real challenging type of work, and yet it's probably the most fulfilling work I've ever seen or done in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I look at this time and say we all can learn if we open our eyes and our hearts now and not get negative and don't feel defeated and discouraged, but look at this as a time of hopefulness. For the folks that live who have always been tuned in to please others, and they live to please others and make everybody happy, believing that's going to fulfill them, I assure you that will not fulfill you. And that's an external motivator type of life. You may be good people, but honestly, you'll never find fulfillment from that. The fulfillment will come when you come to a place within yourself of feeling so good about what you're doing for somebody. Not in the sense of that's what your main thing that motivates you. It's just, that's one of the strongest byproducts of caring for others in need and giving to others. And also, if you're struggling and suffering, go take a look around. You'll discover other people suffering more than you and having a tougher time. And that also gives you that perspective of, I don't have much time to feel sorry for myself. If when I do, take a look around. There's a lot of people suffering a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
All of these things are mechanisms that have to do with that renewal process, that resiliency process. And bottom line is, we're all coming to the point of facing death and dying, and that, no, we're not going to be here forever. If anything has come out of this COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
Crisis, it's if the virus doesn't get you, at least it makes you wake up to the fact that something else will eventually, and you don't have to walk around being fearful and negative. We're all going to die someday, but we don't have to live in terror and fear of it and run the other way. It's almost, the closer you get to it, the more freedom you find to live a more full and rich life and to focus on what really matters.
And what matters.
Yeah, and I believe that this Memorial Day fits that perfectly, and I love it. It's always been a special day for me, but I see it's a pretty special day for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know where we are in this show. We're supposed to be entertaining today. But we had a manager at the radio station says we got to learn to be more entertaining. I don't know how entertaining we've been today, but I hope we've offered you hope and encouragement and a way of feeling good in spite of the difficulties you're having and challenges that you're having. I don't have a crystal ball about what your future will hold, but I'll tell you this. There's one thing that you can consider looking at, and that's your spiritual lives, because it doesn't mean religiosity, but all of us have that spiritual side to us. These are the times it brings out hope. And it's a time to look at that and evaluate that and see where you are with that as well.
That's another important thing.
Absolutely.
That comes out of this time. The Survivor's Guide to Life is made possible through a grant from Sonoma Coast Trauma Treatment, a 501c3 public charity that relies on donations from people like you. And if what we've done today has benefited you, please consider donating to sctraumatreatment.org. Also, we have our website, thesurvivorsguidetolife.com, where you'll find all our podcasts, which are also in video form on YouTube. So please visit our Facebook page, our Instagram, and like and share. You can find more information from us and some resources there at our website, or you could call or email me. I'm Jenny at bernsteininstitute.com. Our number is 707-781-3335, and we just launched a GoFundMe campaign for SCTT that will help support this podcast and also other work that the nonprofit is doing to support caregivers. Thank you.
Thank you, and be well. I hope this is a special day for you as it is for us.
Yes.
Take care.